So when you kind of are growing up with that, and your role model is the male model in your life is, short, cold, drunk, and broke, you're thinking, I don't want to be that one. I don't want to be like that.
Yeah.
So if that meant me not becoming a dad, then that's what I was willing to do way back then. I was like, you know what? I don't want this. And I certainly don't want the responsibility of having to bring up children and being like that, because you can only go on what you see. And you go, well, if I'm going to end up like that, I don't want that. Of course, I don't want to end up like him, but the chances are you will as you grow up. So there's a very rebellious streak to me anyway, but I couldn't fathom the notion of having a little me running around, and that scared me.
Growing up, you did have a father that was, in your words, an alcoholic,
Yep.
and you had to work around that, and that influenced your outlook and your decisions in the future. But before we dive straight into that, you mentioned the fact that in the past you never thought of yourself, settling down, as it were. And even that settling down, I think we need to digest. I genuinely think people need to stop saying I'm settling down. Is I'm moving on or moving up, because settling down, I think, is just almost a plateau of where you're going in life. But talk to me about those fears of being a father that you had.
Well, I think you've got to connect the two. So you've got to connect my role model of a father to why I felt that way. I don't know if we can move away from that. So
Okay.
when I was growing up with an alcoholic father and a drug addict, but not, he wasn't into heavy substances, speed, ease, trips, LSD, stuff like that. He was so absent emotionally and physically. I mean, when I was growing up, my parents got divorced when I was 6, and that was a period of time where being divorced wasn't cool. It wasn't in. It was like, ooh, look, his parents are divorced. What a weirdo. It was that era, right? So that will give you an indication of how old I am, even though I look 21. I know. And because of that, and when he was present, he was moody, he was short, he was, there was no emotional love. I felt that he very much always preferred my brother. My brother could do no wrong. I mean, typical sibling things. But when that is your role model, and then you watch your mother working hard every single day to put food on the table, we didn't have a lot of money. We were kind of on the poor side, but not like starving side. So we had enough, but not a lot. And clothes were passed down, and it was that kind of a upbringing I had. So when you kind of are growing up with that, and your role model is the male model in your life is, short, cold, drunk, and broke, you're thinking, I don't want to be that one. I don't want to be like that.
Yeah.
So if that meant me not becoming a dad, then that's what I was willing to do way back then. I was like, you know what? I don't want this. And I certainly don't want the responsibility of having to bring up children and being like that, because you can only go on what you see. And you go, well, if I'm going to end up like that, I don't want that. Of course, I don't want to end up like him, but the chances are you will as you grow up. So there's a very rebellious streak to me anyway, but I couldn't fathom the notion of having a little me running around, and that scared me. Yeah, look, now we're really good friends. He's in our lives. He's a great grandfather. I think it's that typical, what you mess up with your kids, you make up with your grandchildren, right? No, I did address that with my father, and when I was, I'll never forget the day. It was when I was 15 that my mum answered the phone, and she like, "I told you so. I told you so. I told you so." One of those calls. And then she got off the phone and was like, "Oh, your dad's an alcoholic. He's gone into treatment." And so I remember that day, like, like yesterday. But what happened was, of course, he tried to, while he was in treatment, he'd send me letters and I would ignore them, and he would get in touch and I wouldn't answer. And I used to tell my friends my dad's dead, and like, what did he die of? And I'm like, well, he's not dead, but he's dead to me. But wait, it's really interesting. And then I sat there and I think I was 17 and I was listening to a song by Pink Floyd, Wish You Were Here. Right. Some people might know it, some might not. But basically the chorus is, we're two lost souls swimming in a fishbowl year after year. And I heard that kind of that sentence of like, oh my God, that's me and dad. Are we forever gonna just be these lost souls? And this, I'm 17, right? Just
Yeah.
swimming in this, like, I don't want that. So I reached out to him and I said, you know what? I think I'm ready to see you. I'm ready to rebuild. And then he sat me down. He was living in a 1 bedroom bedsit in Mill Hill in London. And he sat me on the bed. He said, this is me. I'm clean for the first time in 30 years. Um, I'd like to get to know you. I'd like you to get to know me. And I went, all right. And we started to rebuild from there. But that doesn't mean I'd let go of not wanting to be a dad at that point. I still was like, I don't want this. And that went for years. I was like, I don't want to be a dad. I don't want to be a dad. I want to be single. I'm never going to settle down, and all that settle down, whatever language we want to use. I'm never going to be with someone permanently, etc., etc. So we did rebuild. It wasn't easy. We rebuilt a good relationship, and he did since then and always has looked out for me. But it took time, and I'm very open about it in my book, Power to Succeed, about our journey to forgiveness and our journey to becoming friends again, and him being in my life. And of course, since then we fell out once more. I didn't speak to him for a year again because I felt he might have got rid of his alcoholic habits, but he hadn't got rid of his kind of disappointing habits. So then I again for a year removed him from my life. But since then it's back on, and we're close again now.
So you talked about the disappointing habit. You just mentioned that now. What was it? Because you said, I understand you said growing up, it was obviously the sibling issue where you feel that father or mother prefers this one or the other. But you still mentioned the disappointing habit as a grown adult. What was that about?
Well, it's for me, your word is your bond. I've always had that. That's one of my things. Like, if you give me your word, and he broke his word too many times, and to me that's not acceptable. Just not with my dad, with everybody. Like, but if you're my dad, obviously it's magnified. It's a typical, he said he would do something, he didn't, I laid the money out for it, he then wouldn't pay me. It's a very silly thing in the grand scheme of life, right? But at the moment, that's how I was reacted. I was like, do you know what, you've let me down too many times, I'm done with you. And for a year I didn't speak to him until I had, until I grew up inside again, until I let go of that annoyed, spoiled little kid inside of me. And I was just like, you know what? One day the guy's going to die, I'm going to have to bury him. I want to know that I gave everything I could to that relationship. So again, I kind of went back into that forgiveness place, and we've rebuilt. And he apologized as well himself. And he kind of walked into the typical gesture envelope with money in it to say sorry. And I was like, it's one of those almost like movie moments. And it's like, okay, water under the bridge. Let's just move forwards. So yeah, I think it's one thing getting rid of an addiction. It's another thing changing your behavior so you become the best version of yourself. And I think that's a conflict addicts have generally, right? So they might have removed the physical addiction, but building your behavior to becoming the best version is a tough one. And I can never pretend to understand it because I'm not an addict. And I think it took him a while to become the best version of himself. He still has, in my mind, some issue. He's always, he's ill a lot. And I think that's a effect of the addictions, right? But, his heart now is in the right place. He loves the grandchildren, and he's absolutely devastated he can't see them right now because of the lockdown. But when he could, he would come down every week to see them. And, he'll never, I'll never be able to sit down and have a pint with him or a beer with him, obviously, because of the addiction. And that makes me a little sad. But what he is doing for the time right now is great. And I wouldn't have any other way. I might, maybe if he made a few millions, I would be happy. But, that's just me being a bit greedy. But that's up to me to do anyway.
Well, it is, as long as there's happiness in it. I'm not a father yet, but I can relate to the upbringing. Because my father, not dabbled, but he was very much into his alcohol. And I remember growing up so many times, because I was born and raised in Nigeria, many times staying up, and we'd go to open the gate around 1 a.m. because that's when he's coming back.
Oh, yeah.
And doing that so often, it kind of left me saying that I would never touch an alcoholic drink. I promised myself I would never touch it. I'll never touch it. I'll never touch it. And even growing up, it's almost like whenever I think, what is it called? Baileys? Even Baileys, people say, well, that's not really alcohol. That's a Christmas drink. But I couldn't get myself to drink that.
It's interesting because, typical, I think when I was very small, like 12 or 13, I got drunk, was sick. And then I didn't drink for years and years, right? And obviously, having an alcoholic father, there were a few years I didn't drink at all, and then on my 18th birthday, typical, I had some drinks and got drunk. It's my 18th, right? And then that kind of opened up the kind of my drinking side. But I'm not a massive drinker. Of course, I've been drunk in my time, and not anti-alcohol. I think everything is okay in moderation. I think, yeah, we all go a little bit over the top sometimes, but obviously it's like anything. If you're abusive around it, then we have a problem. But if everything in moderation is okay, I mean, I'm certainly not for like heroin and cocaine, and I'm not advocating that. But I've never taken drugs. I've never taken any drugs at all. And I would outlast the people doing coke. I'd have more energy, and and they were like, "What are you on?" I'm like, "Nothing." Probably Red Bull at the time, right? And that's it. But that's how I choose to show up. So I don't have like an anti relationship with any of those things, because also you end up kind of becoming a preacher, like a preachy, or you can alienate yourself, and that's just not the course I've chosen. I do know people, and I've worked with people, my clients, who are extremely anti, and that's who they are, and that's who they want to be. Cool. I just chose not to go down. My brother drinks a lot. He
That's
does.
interesting you said that. Okay, now let's touch on that, because for me, very clear disclaimer, I'm not anti-alcohol at all. It's just one of those things. I actually worked, you're based in London, so Charlton Athletics Football Club.
Yeah.
I used to work in a kiosk serving alcohol and alcoholic beverages. I'm familiar, I'm not against it. My family, during Christmas, festive seasons and whatnot, they have alcohol. I just find my apple juice that looks like alcohol because it's got the sparkles. But the reason why I brought that up is because, touching upon to something, my degree was in psychology, and one of the stories that got me into doing a psychology degree was a story I heard from my teacher years ago now, where she said that there was an example, a longitudinal study done with two individuals where two boys grew up in a family where their dad was an alcoholic and abusive. Now they followed their journey for the next 20 years. They found out that one ended up in jail, alcoholic, and in jail because he was abusive. One ended up with a good family, not crazy about alcohol, tasting it from time to time, but a great father. Now, the reason why I asked this is because when I heard that story, I was thinking to myself, well, they went to the same schools, they lived in the same house, they probably had the same friends. So how did that work out? What was the cognition behind all of it? Now, it's interesting you said that, because you have come out on the right side. And so many people, unfortunately, use the excuse, well, what would you do? Because they asked those two participants, why do you think you ended up this way? And they had the same answer. What would you do if your dad was an alcoholic and abusive? Same answer, but different outcomes.
Yeah.
Well, how would you say that? Because you mentioned you had another brother. How did that work out, the pathways you took? How did that kind of affect that?
I think you have to examine as well, you have to look at kind of the laws of polarity as well, and the laws of balance. And if you look at that, then if one person is very outgoing in your family and very vibrant, then it's often that the sibling is very quiet and reserved. And if you take that notion, then that's literally my brother and I. We're chalk and cheese. I'm very outgoing, I'm very warm, I'm very emotional. He's very reserved, very emotional, constipated, and very quiet. He's very intelligent. He's a very, very clever guy. He's just emotionally very reserved. Versus me, I'm very open. I'll talk about emotional. You ask me how you are, and I'll give you a very long answer. It's like I won't go, I'm okay. Of course, at times I've done that. And I think because of that, and also I've been on a very long personal development. I've had a lot of, coaching, and I've really gone into myself, and I've had a lot of mentors, and I dealt with my dad's alcoholism, and I dealt with the sexual abuse I encountered when I was young, and I dealt with a lot of stuff that allows me now to be open and completely comfortable with who I am. While my brother, I don't think has ever really dealt with anything that's happened to him, right? He's taken it inside, and he holds it there. And he's got two beautiful kids. He's divorced. He's got a rocky relationship with his daughter. And I think this is just my opinion, is because his ability to express himself and his ability to deal is very different. I'm not saying better or worse than mine. His coping strategy is to pull away, reserve, shut down, move on. Well, if I need to deal with something, I'll go and address it. So 2 years ago, I had really bad depression for months. Went to, I think this is in the same room we talked, right? In Clubhouse, I think I mentioned. Went to a spiritual healer for a change, because that's what I was drawn to. She helped me out, and now I can talk about the depression very openly, don't have any issues. So I think because of that, same family, different outcome, we're very different people as well, and we cope very different. So that's probably why we've ended up where we've ended up, because the choices we've made in how we've coped with things have been fundamentally different. And there's no right or wrong. I mean, of course, I'd love him to live a different life and be a different person. But, again, talking about, brother we've never been close. There's no warmth between us. Ironically, when we both started to support Arsenal is when we finally had something to talk about, and when he had kids, we would talk about the kids. But there's no there's no picking up the phone. Hey, El, I'm struggling. Can I talk to you about this? I've got this idea. It's very, very, not superficial. It's very on the surface conversation with my brother. And that's just who he is, and there's no depth. I mean, there is depth to him, but he'll never open up to me. And again, I accept that. That's just the way it is. You know, that's the level of warmth we'll get to. I mean, unless something happens, I don't know. He's already almost died. That hasn't changed him. So I just accept that that's the nature of our relationship.
When I started this podcast last year in April, I started it because I felt that maybe people weren't having enough of these conversations and the journey wasn't talked about. It was only when people arrived there that they then looked back. Hindsight,
Yeah.
people say it's good, but it's dangerous. So the reason why I'm saying that is because that relationship you had with your brother, or you have with your brother, I find myself sometimes feeling like, am I the only one that realizes that the relationship growing up affected me? Or was it just me that it affected? And it's that conflict where for a long time I used to think to myself, well, maybe I'm not okay. Maybe I'm taking it too much. Maybe I'm being too emotional about everything that happened or didn't happen with my father. Now, it's interesting you said that you had to come to accept that. I am still finding that hard to accept because I genuinely feel that if I'm hurting this bad and you're not really addressing this, surely it's going to come back up sometime. How were you able to come to terms, or how are you getting through that?
I think you get to the point where, I think you have to look at your expectations of the other person and accept that it's your expectations of them versus who they are and want to be. The other side to it is that if you don't come from a place of acceptance, you're the one holding the burning rock but expecting them to burn. And it's toxic, right? It's really, it will eat away at you. And then you get angry at how is it not eating away at them? But when you come to that place, and I don't mean like sit there, kumbaya, hippie, it's all good, man. I mean real deep acceptance.
Yeah,
Then it actually opens up the space to heal. And what you end up doing is almost sending them love and sending them kind of giving them that space to heal. And you find by letting it go that things change. I'm not going to say suddenly like, oh, they'll turn into that person you want them to be and everything be okay. But you just find there's a shift in the dynamic because you're not holding that burning rock anymore. And there's an allowingness. And by accepting things for what they are, of course, that's step number one in AA as well. When people go to recover from their alcoholism, I just think it just allows you to detach and move forwards with your life. So again, if you're not accepting, you're the one that's dragging the rock, not them. You're the one going, hey, I've got all this stuff I'm carrying and it's your fault, but you're carrying it. You're still carrying it. By accepting it, you're going, hey, I've got this stuff. I accept it's there. I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to let go of it. But I know it's there, So a lot of people that always talk to me and ask me, like often I talk about when I was 12, I was sexually abused by this guy. And they're like, how can you talk about it so openly? And how can you? It's because I accept what happened. It doesn't mean I like it. It doesn't mean that, I'm like empowering the guy that did it. On the contrary, by dealing with it, I've taken any energetic, any power that guy had for doing it. It's this, I've let go. I accept the situation. I accept that it happened. I accept I was powerless at the time. I accept that I only did what I could do at the time. And I let go. But it doesn't mean I don't acknowledge it's there. And that's the power of acceptance. You see?
That's a powerful reflection on those events, and that's a lot in those things that you said: acceptance, and also just understanding that you need to move on, and giving yourself the freedom to move on.
So my journey to becoming a man, to me has evolved into being the best version of yourself daily. And I think it obviously, now we're talking about fatherhood, it's the ability to put yourself second, but not in a way that you've relegated yourself. Oh, I don't matter. Oh, I'm being left out. It's like, no, the well-being of our kids is important. I'm important, but I accept that my playlist on Spotify is going to be filled with Disney, and we're going to wake up to Sophia the first, and it's kind of going, yeah, sometimes you're kind of like, oh, I just need my man cave. I just need to be a man. I just need to, like, whatever it is. I'm a big football fan. I just need to watch football. I just need to run. I just need to lie on the couch and watch Netflix, but it's kind of the acceptance that you're no longer the center, but it doesn't mean you've taken yourself out and removed yourself. My beautiful girl, Ariella, and my son, Elijah, they're everything, like, because they're so vulnerable. They're so powerful, but yet so, I don't mean weak as in, but they're so many things can happen to them that you are protecting. And to me, being a man is protecting your family, but not through masculinity and muscles. It's providing the safest environment possible for them. And that to me is what fatherhood is. And being a great partner to Emily, my beautiful wife, and listening and being present to her. And that does mean dealing with a lot of stuff that goes in between our own 6 inches. Like, there isn't a day that I'm not battling. And I have to kind of really sit back and go, what is that really about? Am I just being a bit of a prick right now? Or do I have a case? Do I really, is she, or is that just me being, a stupid bloke? I don't mean the blokes are stupid. Do you know what I mean? But we're going to go through those battles. And, being a father is as I said, it's the most rewarding and most challenging journey you're going to be on. And I think you have to accept that you're no longer number one, although in your kids' eyes, you're number one, you're daddy. And, but how you behave, it's about something far greater than you. It's something much bigger than you. And I think a lot of the breakdowns in relationships and fatherhood and, is when the male really struggles with that they're no longer important. And maybe it's an ego thing. Maybe it's a confidence thing. I don't know, because I don't know all the fathers and all the blokes in the world. But I feel a lot of the breakdowns happen. And when Ariella came along, I really had to fight that whole, I don't matter anymore. It's all about Ariella. Oh, I'm redundant. I don't get the affection I used to get. We're not having sex like we used to. Like, all that stuff kicks in. You're like, oh, I don't matter. I just feel like a butler. I'm just getting in a bottle and I'm just this. I'm just changing up. And you go through that. But when you come out of that evolved and you've grown, then you get that actually that's part of the beautiful process. But that's where I think a lot of people struggle. And, you can feel very on your own, especially when kids come along. You can feel very isolated. You can feel very lonely. I can see why a lot of guys end up having affairs because, the woman is so consumed by the kids and the baby. And, they have very little left at the end of the day to be affectionate and sexy and this. And unless, again, you can accept that, you can then go look for it elsewhere. And I feel that's why a lot of guys end up having affairs as well. Well, I think it's a good question. I think, I went for years of acting out. I've always had a bit of a defiant attitude anyway. So I've always had a bit of a watch me kind of way of being. Even back in school, I used to be so disruptive. But again, when I was in school, dyslexia wasn't well known. They just thought I was lazy. They just thought I was disruptive and I wouldn't read and I couldn't write. Like, I can't read any joint handwriting at all. That just like script, they look like lines to me. I just can't. But of course, teachers couldn't comprehend that at the time because the awareness around dyslexia wasn't as high.
Yeah.
So of course, in the early years, my way of responding was acting out, and I used to get into fights with teachers. I used to swear at you can imagine frustrated
Yeah.
16, 17, 18-year-old. And it wasn't until I went to uni that one of the teachers actually went, "Are you sure you're not dyslexic?" I went, "No, I can't be that." And I went, "Well, I'm going to send you for a test." And I did. And oh, you're dyslexic. So this was like, "Congratulations, you're dyslexic," right? And suddenly things made sense. And from then, I just learned to tell people I'm dyslexic and I can't write, or I need more time, or I can't spell. And it's not because I'm making excuses. I can't spell. I can't spell. Like, I feel some people say they're dyslexic and they just can't spell, versus us that are dyslexic and really can't spell. But that's another matter. And I just learned to kind of tell people. And again, I just accept it, and I just accept that it's, in a way, it's a gift. It allows me to see things differently, to think differently. I'm not visual at all. I'm auditory. For me, I listen to things. I don't see things. So I've got my content girl in my company. She's going, "Can't you see the difference of the colors?" And I'm like, "No." "Can't you see that's out of place?" I'm like, "No, I'm not visual." My wife's very visual. She's got like post-it notes everywhere. I'm like, "No, I need words and I like to hear things." So for me, it was just about, again, being able to express myself and tell people, and not attribute any judgment to it, right? It wasn't about me going, "Oh, poor me, I'm dyslexic." It's like, "Look, I'm dyslexic. Like, hey, I like any other thing that someone might have. I can't think of one right now, but I wear trousers. I'm dyslexic." It kind of became that.
Now that takes me on to the next point, because this is an area where I'm sure you've probably spoken to a lot of people. The area of mental health.
Yeah.
Area of mental health, and unfortunately, I find it positive in the fact that, irrespective of the fact that there's more awareness around mental health, there's still that stigma that's almost still rising alongside the awareness. So, how are you able to decide or come to the self awareness that I need to get help?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me, so for months, I never forget it. It was my 42nd birthday, and I woke up and I felt really hollow, really empty. And we had a lovely day. So there's nothing wrong. There was no reason. There was no like, "Oh, I just lost my business. Oh, like business was doing okay. I had a beautiful girl, great relationship." And I just felt really, really hollow. And I thought I'd got over it. And I even wrote this blog about it on my old website. I'm like, "I've got this, I've got the tools," and it just wouldn't go away. It kept getting darker and darker in my mind, my thoughts. There were some suicidal thoughts. There was the whole, "What if I end it? Would anyone care?" Anyway, so that went on for months. And I remember I was on a train at the time. I lived in Woking, and I was on the train to Waterloo. And I just sat there and I was listening to prayer songs, any prayer songs, gospel, Jewish. I was just like looking on Spotify for prayer music. And I got off the train and I was like, that is my soul screaming at me, like, "Sort this out," right? And that's when I knew, like, that was my moment of going, either I jump in front of a train or I sort this out. And I wasn't ready to jump in front of a train, to be completely honest.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
I knew something had to change. And I just sent my friend a message. And she's in the spiritual space. I can't even tell you what we did in the sessions. And I was like, I sent this long, like, and sometimes I look back on it, really long WhatsApp on what's going on in my mind. And typically, like a spiritual teacher that she went, "I've been waiting for you." And I was like, "What?" "Well, if you've been waiting, why didn't you reach out?" She goes, "You had to be ready." I was like, "Oh God."
Wow.
Anyway, so I worked with her and she's amazing. Again, I can't tell you what we actually did in the sessions. Lots of forgiveness, lots of practicing forgiveness, lots of asking for forgiveness, lots of letting go to the higher powers that be. And then a few months later, I knew I was okay again. I was able to actually tell Emily what's been going on with me. My wife's called Emily, by the way.
That's it.
And I changed one of my businesses. I started to close one of my businesses down because it wasn't aligned with who I was post depression. And then from then I was like, you know what, I'm going to speak up about mental health. I'm going to do what I can. I mean, I'm not a big like mental health like campaigner, but I will always provide the platform to help people's mental health. I ran a mental health summit last year and I gained nothing from it. I didn't gain any money. I didn't even gain the contacts, nothing. I just put it on, provided the space for people that need it, and did it that way. And I think that's what needs to be done. And I think for anyone, and I've interviewed people, like one of my best friends, he's on national radio. He talks a lot about mental health, and I interviewed him about it. And I think that for anyone listening that is struggling with their mental health, if you can't focus on anything else, is focusing on knowing that when you come out of it, you can talk about you came out of it, right? If just focus on the immediacy of dealing with it, not I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Um, and maybe the whole purpose is for you just to beat the mental health issues you're challenging right now. And that's a really interesting way of looking at it, because Wyatt, the guy I was talking about, he's the one that kind of said, look, because he has terrible mental health challenges and he's very open about them. And when he has an episode, he goes, I just know the coming out of it is my purpose. And that's what I focus on. And I just think that people, a bit like dyslexia, a bit like anything, need to, as much as they can, let go of the judgment of asking for help, and just express yourself in whatever it means it is to whoever it is. Lack of expression is what creates depression. And if you can find an outlet for that, whatever, and again, Wyatt says this is, you can email me, you can Facebook me, I don't take screenshots, it doesn't go anywhere. And I think it's just finding somewhere where you can express yourself and being okay with it, and being okay that it's a jumble, and being okay it doesn't make sense, and being okay that you're feeling the way you are. Because I think part of the challenge with mental health is when you're suffering, there's a huge amount of judgment you place on yourself because you're suffering. And I went through that, right? And because I was like, look, I've got the tools. I mean, I've trained as a coach. I've done cognitive behavioral hypnotherapy. Like, I've done all these. Why am I here? Well, because I'm a human being. You're a human being, right? Doesn't matter what you've been trained at. Plenty of elite athletes suffer from depression. Plenty of comedians suffer from depression. And they're really funny, so they should be happy all the time, right? Not the case. You know what I mean? You're human first. And we have to allow the human experience to surface, because if we don't, then it does lead to dark places.
There are two questions I'm really anxious to ask you about, and this is for the listeners. I would like you to, what advice would you give to young men that are still on their journey to fatherhood? And then the second question on the back of that would be, what advice would you give to existing fathers in terms of dealing with fatherhood?
Yeah, I mean, again, I just for a disclaimer want to say this is just my opinion, okay, people? So whoever's listening to this isn't, I'm not a fatherhood expert, but here's what I'd say to people, because you and I connected over Clubhouse, and you said that some people question whether I can be a father, why am I running a podcast if I'm not a dad? And I said, well, because you're assimilating as much information as you can. So when you are a dad, you can be the best dad you can possibly be, right? And I think that's it, for those people becoming a father, my biggest kind of advice or suggestion is, let's really deal with our stuff. Let's put the time and the effort and deal with it. Whatever's going on in our minds, whatever's happened in our past, whatever traumas we have, let's do the best to deal with it. So when the days come and you are the father, you can be the best version of yourself. So that would be my first advice. And it's not going to be easy, but it will be worth it. I will say that. To current dads, I would say it's very similar, but in the sense of, let's know our place, let's embrace our place, and let's be a great example to our kids. Let's really show them the way, but in an empowering way. We all know it's a tough and challenging life, but let's provide the safest experience and environment for our kids to go through that. And I don't mean, protect them, collywobble them, rob them in cotton wool. I'm not saying about that. When my kids need to fall, I let them fall, and then I'm there to help them get out. I don't stop them from falling, so to speak. Obviously, if they're going to fall off a cliff, I'll stop them. But they're going to fall and bang themselves. They need to learn that. That's kind of my approach, right? If my son needs to learn to climb, I'm not going to push him up the bum. He needs to struggle to get up there. But behind that is a very safe environment, is my point. And I think if every father could just aim to be the best version of themselves of every single day, then I feel kids would be a lot better. And whatever that means to you, and that's all I ask. I mean, that's kind of my advice. And I think as dads, we're challenged every single day, who we are, our existence, our boundaries, our patience. But I think also we need to focus at the end of that lies something very beautiful, and to remember that as well.
That's excellent. And before we end the show, I just wanted you to, how can people get in touch with Elliot K?
Cool, thank you. I mean, there's it's interesting because very few people get in touch with me about fatherhood, but everybody's, again, I'm an open book. If you want to talk about mental health, you want to ask me about anything that I discussed here, or about anything else I do. So very welcome to reach out via the grams, the Instagrams. I've got 3. Would they be at the bottom there? I'll send them across to you. But if you kind of want an insight into my world, it's I am Elliot K, ELLIOTKAY. You got my kids on there, my running on there. And then there's the professional ones, which I'll send to you. Otherwise, feel free to send me an email, which is hello@speakerexpress.co.uk. Reach out to me however you feel. I'll gladly listen. If you reach out to me about something confidential, it will stay confidential. I won't be like, look at this email I got, right? And I just hope this helps your listeners more than anything. And that's why I wanted to really support you and your podcast. So if I never hear from anyone, I'm okay with that too.
You'll definitely be hearing from me for sure. I want to say thank you. I know you've got a meeting to get to, but it's been an absolute pleasure. And I think what another big takeaway for me is that sentence. I don't know if you coined it before, but lack of expression can lead to depression. I think it's amazing. And thank you for being so transparent. I think that's what's made us so wonderful. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And being on
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Enjoy the rest of your day and your meetings today.
You too. Take care. Be in touch soon.
Absolutely.
See you later. Bye.